On the afternoon of May 12th, decorated Army veteran and award-winning architect Samuel Jones attempted to enter the Gilded Spoon, a newly opened boutique café in the city's affluent Northwood district. His access was deliberately obstructed by another patron, Patricia Finch, who had parked her luxury sedan directly across the wheelchair ramp, blocking it completely. When Mr. Jones politely requested she move her vehicle, Ms. Finch refused, escalating the situation with racially charged insults and ultimately physically assaulting Mr. Jones by shoving his wheelchair. The incident, captured on a bystander's phone, resulted in a $900,000 civil settlement against Ms. Finch and the Gilded Spoon, and a criminal conviction for assault and filing a false police report that carried a 6-month jail sentence. This is the story of how a routine coffee run became a flashpoint for justice, accountability, and the unmasking of prejudice hiding in plain sight. Samuel Jones felt the familiar, rhythmic hum of the electric motors beneath him as his chair glided smoothly over the pristine sidewalk. It was a perfect spring day, the kind that made the city feel less like a concrete labyrinth and more like a park. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolias from the manicured gardens of the Northwood Estates. He had decided to treat himself. The Gilded Spoon had been his project, in a way. Not the whole building, but the accessibility compliance. He'd been the consulting architect who ensured the sleek, modern design met and exceeded every standard set by the Americans with Disabilities Act. He remembered the arguments with the primary designer, a pretentious man named Claude who felt the visual flow was disrupted by the gentle gradient of the ramp. Samuel had won, of course. The law was the law, but more than that, dignity was dignity. He had ensured the ramp was wide, textured for grip, and flanked by elegant, brushed steel handrails. It was a thing of functional beauty, an integrated part of the entrance, not an afterthought. He felt a quiet pride looking at it now, a silent testament to his life's work, building a world that didn't shut people like him out. The café was bustling, its large glass windows showing a lively crowd of well-dressed patrons sipping artisanal lattes. It was precisely the kind of place where people spent $12 on a coffee and felt good about it. Samuel wasn't here for the scene. He was here to see his work in action, to enjoy the fruits of his own labor. As he approached the entrance, his path was blocked. A gleaming white SUV, a model that cost more than his first house, was parked at a jaunty angle, its rear passenger side tire resting squarely on the base of the ramp he had so carefully designed. Its front end jutted out, effectively creating a wall. Samuel stopped, his brow furrowing slightly. It was such a flagrant violation, so thoughtless, that it was almost comical. He looked for a driver, but the vehicle was empty. He waited a patient minute, then another. People flowed in and out of the café, stepping around the SUV, none of them giving it a second thought. He was invisible, his path irrelevant. Finally, a woman emerged from the café, holding a small, frilly dog in one arm and a designer handbag in the other. She was in her late 50s, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a look of serene entitlement. She walked directly to the driver's side door of the SUV. "Excuse me," Samuel said, his voice calm and even. "Ma'am, you're blocking the ramp." Patricia Finch turned, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. It was a slow, dismissive appraisal, the kind one gives to a piece of furniture that's out of place. Her lips, painted a severe shade of coral, tightened into a thin line. "I'll only be a moment," she said, her tone clipped and dismissive. She made no move to get into her car. "I understand, but I need to use the ramp to get inside," Samuel explained, keeping his voice level. "If you could just pull forward a few feet, I can get by." Patricia let out a theatrical sigh, a sound of profound inconvenience. "There's another entrance around the back, isn't there? For deliveries and such. Why don't you try that?" Samuel felt a familiar cold knot tighten in his stomach. Deliveries and such, the casual dehumanization was a blade honed sharp by years of practice. He refused to let it cut him. "This is the primary, accessible entrance," he stated, his voice now carrying a new firmness. "The law requires it to be kept clear. I'm asking you politely to move your car." The woman's face hardened, the mask of polite society slipping to reveal something ugly beneath. "I don't see what the big deal is. Can't you just wait?" "Some people are so impatient," a young man in a college sweatshirt, who had been watching the exchange from a few feet away, hesitantly stepped forward. "Ma'am, he's right. You can't park there," Patricia whirled on him. "You mind your own business. This has nothing to do with you." She turned back to Samuel, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper. "Look, I'm just running in to pick up a scone for Muffin," she cooed, stroking the little dog. "It's a special almond flour recipe. You wouldn't understand." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "You people, you're kind." Samuel's hands tightened on the controls of his chair. He had faced down enemy fire in deserts halfway across the world. He had endured months of grueling rehabilitation, learning to navigate a world that was no longer built for him. He would not be defeated by a scone. "It's not about patience, ma'am. It's about the law," he said, his voice like steel. "You are violating Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in places of public accommodation. This ramp is a federally mandated point of access. By blocking it, you are breaking federal law." The specificity of his words seemed to momentarily stun her. Her carefully constructed world of privilege and assumptions had no ready defense against facts, against the language of statutes and regulations. But the shock quickly curdled into rage. Her face flushed a blotchy red. "How dare you? Who do you think you are, talking to me like that? You're probably just trying to cause a scene to get a handout." The accusation was so vile, so divorced from reality, that Samuel could only stare at her. A small crowd was now gathering. Phones, he noticed, were beginning to emerge from pockets. The discrete red dots of recording icons began to glow. Patricia seemed to draw strength from the attention, mistaking shocked silence for support. "I'm not moving my car," she spat, her voice rising in pitch. "And if you don't get out of my way, I'll call the police and tell them you're harassing me." Samuel didn't move. He held her gaze. "Go ahead," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "Call them. I'll wait." The threat, which she had wielded like a weapon her entire life, had failed. It had bounced harmlessly off the armor of his composure. This unexpected resistance drove her over the edge. Her face contorted into a mask of pure fury. "You people are always looking for a fight," she shrieked. The "you people" echoed in the sudden silence of the street. It was no longer a dog whistle, it was a siren. Before anyone could react, she took 2 quick steps forward and placed both hands on the front of his wheelchair. She shoved. It wasn't a powerful push, but it was violent and unexpected. The chair lurched backward, one wheel catching on the uneven edge of a paving stone, sending a painful jolt up Samuel's spine. He instinctively grabbed his wheels to stabilize himself, his heart pounding with a mixture of shock and adrenaline. The little dog in her arm yapped, startled by the sudden movement. The gasp from the small crowd of onlookers was audible. The young man who had tried to intervene earlier now had his phone up, its lens aimed squarely at Patricia Finch. "I have that on video," he said, his voice shaking slightly but clear. "I have you assaulting him." Patricia's eyes darted around, seeing not the supportive audience she had imagined, but a circle of disapproving faces. For the first time, a flicker of panic crossed her features. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. She pulled out her own phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. "Yes, hello? I need an officer immediately," she said, her voice a caricature of a frightened victim. "There's a man, a very aggressive man in a wheelchair. He's threatening me. He rolled his chair into me. I'm at the Gilded Spoon on Northwood Avenue. Please, hurry. I'm afraid of what he might do." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. She was painting herself as the victim while standing over the man she had just assaulted, the man whose rights she was actively violating. Samuel simply sat there, his expression unreadable, as he listened to her weave a fiction for the 911 operator. He knew the script. He had seen it play out countless times before for countless other black men. The weaponization of white female fear. The automatic assumption of black male guilt. He let her finish, let her dig her own grave. When she hung up, she glared at him triumphantly, as if she had just checkmated him in a game of chess. "They're on their way," she said, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "We'll see who's breaking the law now." 2 police cruisers arrived within minutes, their lights flashing but sirens off, a measured response for the tranquil, low-crime neighborhood. 2 officers, a burly, middle-aged white man named Miller and his younger, more athletic-looking partner, Evans, stepped out of the first car. They surveyed the scene. The small crowd of onlookers, the illegally parked SUV, the blonde woman clutching a small dog, and the black man in a wheelchair. Officer Miller's eyes immediately settled on Patricia, who had composed her features into a mask of tearful distress. He approached her first, his entire posture exuding a protective, almost paternal concern. "Ma'am, are you the one who called? Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Oh, thank God you're here, officer," Patricia sobbed, dabbing at a dry eye with the back of her hand. "This man, he came out of nowhere. He was so aggressive. He demanded I move my car, and when I told him I'd just be a second, he rolled his chair right into me. He was yelling, making a scene. I was terrified." Miller nodded gravely, taking her statement as gospel. He shot a hard, accusatory look over at Samuel. Evans, meanwhile, was taking in the whole picture with a more neutral expression, his gaze lingering on the SUV parked squarely over the ramp. Miller walked toward Samuel, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. His body language was all intimidation. "All right, what's your side of it?" he asked, the question a mere formality. The tone suggested he'd already made up his mind. Samuel met his gaze without flinching. "Officer, my name is Samuel Jones. This woman parked her vehicle illegally, blocking federally mandated wheelchair access to this establishment. I politely asked her to move it. She refused, became verbally abusive, used racial slurs, and then assaulted me by shoving my chair. There are at least a dozen witnesses, and the entire incident, including the assault, was recorded." He gestured calmly with his head toward the young man with the phone. Miller glanced at the young man, then back at Samuel, his expression unchanged. "He says you rolled your chair into her. That's assault, son." The word son was laced with a condescending familiarity that set Samuel's teeth on edge. "That is a false statement, and she knows it," Samuel replied, his voice still steady. "She filed a false police report, which, as I'm sure you know, is a crime." Miller smirked. "You seem to know a lot about the law. You a lawyer?" "I'm a citizen who knows his rights," Samuel said. "And I also know that her vehicle is in violation of City Ordinance 4-17, prohibiting the obstruction of a public right-of-way. In addition to the ADA violation," the second officer, Evans, now spoke up, addressing his partner. "Dave, the car is blocking the ramp." "That's a clear violation." Miller waved a dismissive hand at his partner. "We'll deal with that later. Right now, I'm dealing with an assault complaint." He turned back to Samuel. "I'm going to need to see some ID." Samuel reached into the side pocket of his jacket and retrieved his wallet. He handed the officer his driver's license. Miller took it, glanced at it, and then his eyes narrowed. He saw the small, almost imperceptible veteran designation on the card. It didn't fit the narrative he had constructed. He handed it back. "So, Mr. Jones," Miller said, drawing out the name sarcastically, "you're saying this nice lady, for no reason at all, just decided to assault you in front of all these people. Her reason was that I, a black man in a wheelchair, had the audacity to ask her to follow the law," Samuel said plainly. "Her reason was prejudice. Ask the witnesses. Better yet, ask to see the video." Patricia, seeing the conversation was not going as planned, interjected loudly. "He's lying. He's twisting everything. Officer, are you going to let him get away with this?" Miller seemed torn. His instinct was to believe Patricia, to restore the familiar order of things. But the witnesses, the phone, his partner's quiet skepticism, and Samuel's unshakable composure were creating cracks in his certainty. "Look," Miller said, his frustration growing. "Maybe everyone just needs to calm down. Ma'am, why don't you move your car, and you," he pointed at Samuel, "can just go on your way. We can forget this whole thing happened." It was an offer to sweep injustice under the rug, to pretend the assault, the slurs, the violation of rights had been a simple misunderstanding. It was an offer to protect the perpetrator at the expense of the victim. Samuel shook his head slowly. "No, officer. We're not going to forget this happened. This woman committed a crime. Several, in fact. I was assaulted. My civil rights were violated. And she knowingly filed a false police report in your presence. I wish to press charges." Miller's jaw tightened. This was not how these things were supposed to go. The situation was slipping out of his control. "Press charges?" he scoffed. "It's your word against hers." "No," a new voice said. The young man with the phone stepped forward, holding it out. "It's her word against this." He tapped the screen. The video began to play. The audio was crystal clear. Patricia's voice, shrill and laced with contempt. "You people are always looking for a fight." Then, the visible shove. The lurch of the wheelchair. The collective gasp of the crowd. It was undeniable. A silence fell over the group. Officer Evans moved to the young man's side, watching the screen intently. Miller's face went pale. He looked from the phone to Patricia Finch, whose smug expression had dissolved into one of pure, unadulterated panic. She started to stammer. It's not what it looks like. He was provoking me. He was saying terrible things." Evans looked up from the phone, his expression grim. "Ma'am, the video has audio. He was calm the entire time. He cited the law. You assaulted him. Then you called 911 and lied." He turned to his partner. "Dave, we have a problem." Miller finally seemed to grasp the full scope of the situation. He was no longer a knight defending a damsel in distress. He was an officer of the law who had nearly sided with a criminal against her victim, based on nothing more than his own biases. He was a potential party to a civil rights lawsuit himself. His entire demeanor shifted. The swagger evaporated, replaced by a rigid, professional formality. He looked at Samuel, and for the first time, he seemed to actually see him, not as a problem to be managed, but as a man who had been wronged. "Mr. Jones," Miller said, his voice now clipped and official. "I apologize for the misunderstanding. We will take your statement. I'm going to have my partner take statements from the witnesses as well." He then turned to a horrified Patricia Finch. "Ma'am, you need to turn around and place your hands behind your back." Patricia's jaw dropped. "What? You're arresting me? This is absurd. Do you know who my husband is? I will have your badge for this." The empty threats of a collapsing queen. Miller was unmoved. He took her by the arm, his grip firm. "Patricia Finch, you are under arrest for assault and for filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent." As Officer Evans led a sputtering, protesting Patricia to the back of the cruiser, Miller turned back to Samuel. He handed him a card with a case number on it. "You'll be contacted by the district attorney's office." "Again, sir. My apologies." Samuel simply nodded, watching as the cruiser pulled away, taking with it the woman who had tried to erase his dignity. He looked at the ramp, his ramp, now finally clear. The battle was over, but he knew the war for justice had just begun. The video, uploaded by the student witness under the title entitled "Racist Assaults Veteran in Wheelchair," went viral before Samuel even got home. By the next morning, it had 3 million views. The story was picked up by local news, then national outlets. The Gilded Spoon was inundated with one-star reviews and calls for a boycott. Its owner, the same Claude who had argued against the ramp, issued a panicked, poorly worded apology that only fanned the flames. Samuel, however, was focused. He didn't care about the fleeting outrage of the internet. He wanted lasting, systemic change. He called Marcus Thorne, a college friend who was now one of the most feared civil rights attorneys in the country. Thorne listened to the story, watched the video, and his response was immediate and chillingly calm. "Sam," he said, "we're not just going to sue her. We're going to sue the cafe for failing to maintain accessible premises and for failing to train their staff, who stood by and did nothing. We're going to make an example out of them." The lawsuit was filed the following week. It named Patricia Finch for assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It named the Gilded Spoon LLC for negligence and violation of the ADA. The discovery process was brutal for the defendants. Patricia's deposition was a disaster. Under Thorne's surgical questioning, her story unraveled completely. She admitted she had been annoyed. She admitted she knew she was blocking the ramp. She claimed Samuel's tone was threatening, a classic racist trope that Thorne dismantled with ease by playing the video, where Samuel's voice never rose above a conversational level. The cafe's owner, Claude, fared no better. He admitted there was no staff training on ADA compliance or de-escalation. He confessed that employees were told to not get involved in customer disputes. Thorne established a clear pattern of negligence. Facing a public relations nightmare and the certainty of a massive jury award, the cafe's insurance company pushed for a settlement. Thorne was relentless. He didn't just want compensation for Samuel. He wanted to punish the behavior. The final settlement was for $900,000. $400,000 from Patricia Finch's personal assets and homeowners insurance, and $500,000 from the Gilded Spoon's business policy. As part of the settlement, The café was also required to donate to a disability rights organization and implement a mandatory, company-wide ADA and anti-bias training program, to be designed and approved by a third-party consultant, Samuel Jones himself. He would be paid his standard consulting fee for the work. It was a perfectly ironic and deeply satisfying clause. But the civil case was only half the battle. The district attorney's office, under immense public pressure from the viral video, pursued the criminal charges against Patricia with vigor. The charges were simple: misdemeanor assault and the more serious charge of filing a false police report. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Alicia Reyes, argued for a hate crime enhancement on the assault charge, citing Patricia's use of the phrase, "You people." The trial was short. The video was the star witness. It played on a large screen for the jury, a silent, damning indictment. The student who filmed it testified. Officer Evans testified, recounting the false claims Patricia had made on the scene. When Patricia took the stand in her own defense, her attempts to portray herself as the victim crumbled under Reyes's cross-examination. She came across as arrogant, dishonest, and completely lacking in remorse. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts, including the hate crime enhancement. At the sentencing hearing, Samuel gave a victim impact statement. He didn't speak with anger, but with a profound and weary sadness. He spoke not just of his own experience, but of the daily gauntlet of indignities that people with disabilities, particularly people of color, are forced to navigate. This was not about a parking spot, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. It was about my right to exist in a public space. It was about my right to be treated with the basic human dignity that is afforded to others without a second thought. When Mrs. Finch blocked that ramp, she was saying that my access to the world was less important than her convenience. When she assaulted me and lied to the police, she was relying on a system that she believed would value her word over my truth, her skin color over mine. For there to be justice, that belief must be shattered, the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, clearly agreed. She sentenced Patricia Finch to 6 months in county jail, 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service at a disability resource center, and mandatory anger management and racial bias counseling. The sentence was far harsher than the minimums, a clear signal from the bench. Patricia Finch, who had started her day planning to buy a fancy scone for her dog, was handcuffed and led from the courtroom in tears. The aftermath was transformative. The Gilded Spoon, under new management and with a renewed commitment to accessibility, became a model for other local businesses. Officer Miller was placed on administrative leave pending an internal affairs investigation into his handling of the initial call, and was ultimately reassigned to a desk job and required to undergo extensive retraining. Samuel used a significant portion of his settlement to launch the Jones Foundation for Accessible Futures, a nonprofit dedicated to providing pro bono architectural consulting for small businesses and community centers struggling to meet ADA standards. He didn't want to just win lawsuits. He wanted to prevent them from ever being necessary. He wanted to build a world where no one ever had to fight for the simple right to enter a room. Months later, Samuel returned to the Gilded Spoon. The ramp was clear. A new, small plaque had been installed near the entrance. This establishment is committed to providing equal access for all members of our community. He guided his chair up the smooth incline, the hum of the motors a quiet song of victory. He ordered a coffee, found a table by the window, and watched the world go by, a world he was slowly, painstakingly, helping to rebuild, one ramp at a time.